myself. Is he washing the blood of your shadow? 'Cause the lamb trotted it away. When they stop shipping workhorses, spread your own anyway. I don't pass the test of the paper bag, 'cause I'm black myself. I pick the banjo up and they stare at me, 'cause I'm black myself. You better lock your doors when I walk by, 'cause I'm black myself. You look me in my eyes, but you don't see me, 'cause I'm black myself. They're washed in the blood of the shadow, 'cause our lamb trotted away. When they stop shipping workhorses, they bet their own anyway. Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. I'd like to kick us off this morning by welcoming you back to our second episode in our Reimagining Opportunities for Investment in the South series. And once again, I am Rhea Williams Bishop, Director of Mississippi and New Orleans Programs at the WK Kellogg Foundation. One of the core themes of ROI in the South is that we as investors need to deeply understand a place and honor that place's complexities and histories in order to make investments that meet returns and contribute to addressing racial wealth gaps. New Orleans gives us the opportunity to examine in depth why contextual understanding, local partnerships, and a racial equity lens are critical to successful investments in the region. So today we'll hear from dynamic leaders and powerful voices who are deeply rooted in the city's economic growth and vitality. So let's begin. We'll take a look at some housekeeping issues and reminders for our experience today to guide us. So please include your organization's name in your frame by clicking next to your Zoom title. And then feel free to use the chat or any comments or questions throughout today's experience. I also want to remind you that a recording of today's conversation will be available in the post-session newsletter that will be sent out to each of you. Now let's take a look at our agenda for this morning's session. After our opening and kickoff, we will hear from Deirdre Johnson-Burrell, our Senior Program Officer at WKKF, who is based in and leads our New Orleans team. She will be followed then by a rich conversation with a dynamic panel of local leaders joining us from New Orleans. We have Christy Slater from the Women's Foundation of the South and former WKKF staffer who will moderate the conversation. She'll be joined by Lamar Gadir, a data extraordinaire and executive director of the data center. And lastly, but certainly not least, we're honored to have Judy Reese-Morris, president and CEO of the Urban League of Louisiana, with us as well. The Urban League is focused on empowering underserved communities and securing economic self-reliance, parity, power, and civil rights. So after the panel, you'll learn how we go to yes with two featured investment opportunities that will be presented by WKKF investment program officers Humera Fez and Susie Lee, along with a moderated Q&A session by Mark Newberg. Then you will take what you've learned, heard, and experienced into a very intimate breakout session with peer investors. Then finally, you will hear from my fellow colleague and WKKF MDI Director, Cynthia Muller, who will close us out for the day. So, are you ready? I am ready and always ready to experience the sights and sounds of this great city. So let's get started with a video that will transport you to a place like no other, the Crescent City, New Orleans.
New Orleans. An improbable city intersecting place and time. A mix of mysticism and magic, of music and mirth. An impossible past,
is vaccinated against yellow fever.
an indomitable spirit, and an optimism that refuses to be bound. The last outpost of empires that ceased to be. The final battle of a war that no longer was. The penultimate ride in segregation's sorry stand. The will to face each storm and say, I will not bow. This is the story of how that past became this present, and how this present shapes a future soon to be. Of how tumult and test, how fever and fest forged something more than history or hope. Whether wrought from iron or sung from the soul, whether painted by brush or written in code, this is creativity at all times, ingenuity for all time. This is a singular city spun from the shimmering threads of interwoven tradition. This is where jazz was born, crafted by cultures that otherwise would never have met. Where the rhythm of the river's daily rhyme set the groove by which the city still swings. This is where culture is elevated to art, art to ethereal, and all of it underpinning an economy that has risen time and time again. Through storms of nature and man, in times of strife, in moments of celebration, New Orleans raises trumpets to the wind and unfurls a song that says, follow me, I will lead the way.
So, wow, I have seen this video a number of times and still get excited and feel the spirit of the city. So I hope in some way you feel like we took you there this morning. Brad Pitt described it as New Orleans has a real spirit. It's the most authentic of all American cities. And hopefully we were able to convey that and actually be able to have everybody be there soon. Now I'd like to introduce my amazing colleague, Deirdre Johnson-Burrell, who is a native New Orleanian who just exudes what it means when one says, I am New Orleans. And I'll turn it over to her for opening remarks.
Good morning. Thank you, Ria. Good morning. It is both an honor and a pleasure to provide background for today's rich discussion on my beloved hometown, New Orleans. Some have called her the northernmost Caribbean city. Mark Twain said there are only 3 American cities: New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans. Dr. Dwight Webster, my former pastor, said, "There is no place like this place, anywhere near this place. So this must be the place." And if you have had the great pleasure of living in New Orleans, visiting, or even dreaming of visiting New Orleans, then you understand the sentiment. New Orleans is more than a place. It's an experience. You don't just see, touch, taste, or feel her cuisine, culture, and people. You feel them. It's an immersion in authenticity. We don't do superficial. It's why you either love her or you don't. There is no lukewarm. Founded in 1718, New Orleans is the nation's oldest city and was the center, one of the nation's oldest cities, and was the center of our nation's earliest economies, including serving as the home of the nation's largest slave market. And New Orleans is who she is because of the indelible imprint of her diverse ancestry: Indigenous, Spanish, French, and African. This diverse ancestry has shaped her culture and make her a bellwether for the problems, possibilities, and progress of racial justice in the South and the nation. New Orleans racial justice and civil rights history precede Reconstruction, including catalyzing the integration of public education during Reconstruction, the integration of public schools during Reconstruction, ushering in the Jim Crow era via the historic Plessy versus Ferguson decisions. She is the literal home of the 20th century civil rights movement, as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was founded here. And it was here in 1940's lawsuit equalizing the compensation between Black and white educators that laid the groundwork for the use of litigation as a central strategy in the fight for equal rights in the modern day civil rights movements. So goes New Orleans, so goes the South. And despite over 300 years of fighting for racial justice, African Americans have only had an opportunity for economic inclusion in the last 50 years. Even before Hurricane Katrina, the legacy of economic inequality marked the city. Today, 47% of Black children live in poverty, compared to just 9% of their white counterparts. And while Black entrepreneurs comprise 40% of businesses, they earn just 2% of receipts. While many came to New Orleans in 2005 after Katrina, unfortunately, many left within the first 3 to 5 years, which, let's be real, 3 centuries of problems were not going to be solved in 3 years. Instead, it was Hurricane Katrina that inspired the Kellogg Foundation to look more deeply at New Orleans. And in 2008, we said the city would be a priority for our investments for at least 20 years. The foundation understood this is a long game, and there's value in the long game. We have learned that when we listen and work alongside community, substantive change is possible, and we are seeing that happen here. For example, we're building a more inclusive economy in the region through flexible spending, through flexible lending and technical assistance. We've been able to strengthen a public-private economic development partnership that is paying real dividends. In the last 5 years, our investments have been able to leverage $15 million in flexible capital for women and BIPOC-led entrepreneurs. This is building real on-ramps, supporting these businesses as they do the heavy lift of build up, scale up, and stay up. And just this past year, just this past quarter, our city passed a ballot initiative to invest $21 million per year in early childhood education, almost closing the early education access gap, shaping the future of the workforce and transforming supports for families today. That investment is only possible in the long game. Just over a decade ago, our state superintendent was publicly uncertain about the value of early education, but we made the investment alongside community, stayed the course, and a $21 million investment was made possible. And I promise you, there is room for you in this movement to transform New Orleans. According to the business case for racial equity, by 2050, more than half of the population, workforce, and consumers in New Orleans will be people of color. Meaning we can realize a $43 billion gain in economic output by 2050 if we can close the racial equity gap. It's not a zero-sum game. We're making real progress in New Orleans on building a more inclusive economy. But we need partners who share the values and vision and are willing to stay the course. Thank you for your presence today and your attention. I would love to introduce my dear colleague, Christy Slater, Vice President of Programs for the Women Foundation of the South, to get us started on the deeper discussion. Christy?
Thank you, Deidre. Uh-oh, everything disappeared. Hold on. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you all and all of my great colleagues at the Kellogg Foundation, all of our esteemed guests, and our brilliant panelists. I'm very excited to see this experience come to light and take you virtually to my beloved hometown of New Orleans. You've probably seen my bio, but what you should also know about me is that I love New Orleans, even when she doesn't love me back. So much so, I focused the last 18 years of my career on building the health, wealth, and power of people of color in New Orleans, all in the hopes that she will become her fully equitable self. In thinking about the work I'm called to do and today's discussion, I'm reminded of the W.E.B. Du Bois quote, "As the South goes, so goes the nation." I believe that statement can be distilled even further, and as you heard, Deidre agrees, to "as New Orleans goes, so goes the South, so goes the nation." To be successful in New Orleans, you have to be able to navigate from the barroom to the boardroom. The challenges New Orleanians are facing today stem from the fact that folks love to spend time with the people in the barroom, but fail to include them in the discussions and decisions being made in the boardroom. In New Orleans, like communities everywhere, change can only happen at the pace of the people. Investments made for the community without the community ultimately fail. We've witnessed that at every system level, especially in post-Katrina New Orleans. As we look to the not too distant future, New Orleans, like the nation, will be majority minority by the year 2050. We have less than 30 years to decide and do. Will we continue the policies and practices of yesterday and cap the economic potential of the city and the state? Or will we make the smart decision to invest in equitable outcomes? Our panelists are working toward the latter. Today, we will discuss what investing in New Orleans could and should look like to create conditions for everyone to thrive. I'm very excited to be joined by Judy Reese-Morse, President and CEO of the Urban League of Louisiana, and Lamar Gardier, Executive Director of the Data Center. Lamar, let's start with you for opening remarks.
Sure. Thank you, Christy, and thank you to Deirdre and others for inviting us to this conversation. I promise that is me in that picture, even though I don't quite look like it anymore. So as you've heard and might imagine, New Orleans' history is an interesting one. We tend to think of New Orleans in today's term when we think about it, but prior to the 60s and 70s, our history was really one of economic strength. Early on in our 300-year history, New Orleans was a place of unparalleled diversity in America, and that openness to diversity helped us attract people to our city. In fact, by 1840, we were the largest city in the nation, which in those days also meant that we wielded power, like real economic power. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, we began a series of legislative and social practices aimed at restricting the rights of people of color. And from that point on, our relative ranking of economic strength began to drop. This continued on through the civil rights era into the period of the 70s, which was characterized by political advancement for Black people, but also disinvestment in terms of dwindling tax revenues, population loss, and declining economic opportunity, which was largely fueled by white flight and the decline of key industries in our region. Just prior to this period, New Orleans was larger than both Houston and Atlanta. When you look at New Orleans now and ask yourself, what happened? Even outside of disasters like Hurricane Katrina and things like that, your answer really does have to include that just as our nation's laws were changing in a way that would allow Black people to participate in the economy, And in the most diverse city, in one of the most diverse cities in the nation, we failed to build an inclusive economy. Instead, we fashioned one that neither supported Black employment in industries that would provide good family-sustaining wages, nor nurture entrepreneurs of color. As a result, we created wide structural disparities in wealth, poverty, employment, income, and other key areas that are still with us today. Fortunately, that story is beginning to be well understood in New Orleans and has helped us to get to local conversations about race that are far more advanced than what we hear in most other cities. And I'll leave you with that in terms of how we kind of got to today in New Orleans.
Thanks, Lamar. Judy, would you care to share some opening remarks?
I would love to. Good morning. Thank you, Christy. It is so great to see you and to be here with you and Lamar. Thank you so much to Rhea, to Deirdre, to Javon, and the entire Kellogg Foundation family for the opportunity to participate in this important panel discussion on community in New Orleans. As the president and CEO of the Urban League of Louisiana, I have the honor and the privilege of working with and on behalf of the community in all of its dynamic, joyous, complex, and powerful glory. Community is this city's heartbeat and its soul. It is truth, it is power, and it is always speaking. At the Urban League, we prioritize community and connect to it every day, through serving preschoolers and high school students, career seekers and entrepreneurs, families fighting for environmental justice and for fair congressional districts. It's what we hear and learn that informs how we create programming and advocate for policies. The Urban League works to co-create with community an environment where all can thrive, not just survive. And we advance this model because it acknowledges the talent and the value of community and can lead to, we believe, sustainable, equitable solutions. You've heard it mentioned by Deirdre and Christy already, the reality of everyone except community benefiting from what community creates. It's a reality that can change, and it must change if New Orleans is ever going to reach her full potential. There must be bold and courageous investors like the Kellogg Foundation who see the potential and who want to see change. Whether it's a small business and an anchor institution working together on procurement policy, or an apprentice working with an employer to fill career positions, the opportunity for all those who love the culture that community creates every day is to invest in what lifts up community as experts and as leaders. New Orleans offers the chance to practice racial equity and to honor the city's culture by investing in those who make it possible every day.
Thank you so much, Judy and Lamar, for your opening remarks. And full disclosure, I'm on the board of the Urban League of Louisiana. I'm happy and proud to serve. All right, so now let's take the conversation further. I'd like to ask two of you some specific questions so our audience can better understand why investment in New Orleans and how to do it right now to generate positive returns and deep equitable impact in the city. So here's the question. Can you talk about the opportunities that you're seeing on the ground that strengthen the investment ecosystem and build from the cultural ingenuity in the city? Judy, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you, Christy. I have a couple of examples that I want to share, but the core of what I'm going to say is, again, about engaging community, listening, learning, and then designing and creating so that the solutions respond to what community wants. They know the challenges better than anyone, and they also know the solutions better than anyone. And so work that is designed with that concept in mind, I believe, has the greatest potential for success and for addressing the disparities that exist in New Orleans and within the region. But a couple of examples about what is working, I believe. I want to first lift up the Sea Change Collective. The Sea Change Collective is a data-driven, community-focused, outcomes-driven initiative that is committed to identifying and advancing policy and practice solutions to close the racial wealth gap in the greater New Orleans region. Sea Change works in close partnership to close the racial wealth gap for both African Americans and Latinos through policy, practice, and narrative rooted in racial equity. This initiative has identified 3 levers to close the racial wealth gap in the region. The first is income and wages. The second is home ownership. And the third is business ownership. These levers were chosen because data analysis identified them as the fastest ways to closing the wealth gap. Sea Change uses the collective impact model, and it's a framework for bringing people together to achieve social change. Partners come together to develop a common agenda, choose a backbone organization to provide administrative guidance, engage in continuous communication. This piece is critical. Implement mutually reinforcing activities to advance the common agenda, and use shared measurement to determine progress. This initiative proudly partners with Lamar Gardier and his team at the data center, and for the past 18 months has worked with a steering committee of leaders representing organizations focused on the 3 levers of change. There's also a national steering committee, which includes Bill Bynum, Mark Morial, Angela Glover Blackwell, Dr. Andre Perry, Peggy Davis, and Janae Queen Nazaire. And they have served as thought partners, champions, and leads to resources and support for the collective. I am excited to report that in just a few months, the Sea Change Collective will move into implementation and announce the outcomes and the strategies that seek to address conditions to close the racial wealth gap. Another investment opportunity on the ground is the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund at the New Orleans Business Alliance. This fund was created to support small businesses and help them to grow to become $10 million enterprises. The focus is on high growth potential businesses with supports from 2 local HBCUs and public and private sector opportunities. The idea is that by accelerating expansion and high growth potential businesses, the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund is another example of closing the racial wealth gap and creating more opportunities for small business owners to create generational wealth. Those are just 2 ideas, Christy, that are really exciting here in the area. There are a number of others, but I hope that you were able to hear the thread that ran through both of those examples and that align with what we've all talked about as the key to success in this region. It is identifying those who are closest to the challenge and present the best ideas and examples to provide solutions to advance themselves and everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Judy. Lamar, let's turn to you. Do you need me to repeat the question? Are you good?
I think I'm good. I think
All
I'm
right.
good. And I appreciate that Judy was able to lay the foundations for what I'm also thinking to say here. It's that our environment is prepared for the investments that can be and should be made in this region. We now understand that our success is based on our people and what we do for our people and how we support our people. And it's not just in folks like us who are on this call today, who in many ways understand those things already. Our economic development organizations, actors, and players are also starting to understand that in this post-Katrina New Orleans. To be clear, a strong economy starts with the people. You can't just use incentives and things like that to attract business. You have to have a strong population that undergirds the businesses that might come. And I'm glad to say that our economic development organizations are now including that in their platform for economic development. They're including equity in our platform, in their platforms around economic development, and that investments in people are what will get us to a stronger, more diverse economy. And that our growth is really only going to come from investing in our people. We also are starting to understand that the way we approach problems in our region matters. We used to have a very punitive approach to solving problems that were systemic in our region, which often meant punishing people of color. These days, we have a better understanding, whether it's education, criminal justice, or the cultural economy itself. When we're trying to improve the way those systems function, we have to reimagine how they work, right? And focus on the outcomes and understand that its poor performance before was because the systems were designed to produce outcomes that were not very good for people of color. And so now we're learning to balance short-term needs for action with recognizing and solving root causes, right, that require long-term, sometimes hard to implement systemic solutions. But what that does, it now provides space for us to build on our strengths in terms of our diversity, our culture, our innovation, and water. Like, we think of water sometimes as a problem in New Orleans, but it's also a source of great opportunity here in our city. We also have, I think, good existing infrastructure to build on, honestly. We have better data in New Orleans these days, and many of us know how to use it. And the community is determined in a way that focuses on what will work. I like to think that the data center helped with that. But we do have that infrastructure here in the city, and it has been useful. There are structures that undergird our culture, and those things exist, all of which contribute to a strong ecosystem for success here in New Orleans.
All right, thank you, Lamar. I appreciate that. Question 2. So when you think about this audience of investors, what would you say to them about how to make equitable investments in a place like New Orleans? Lamar, we'll kick this one off with you.
Okay. Well, it's what I just said, right? That our economy is going to depend on investing in our people, right? An inclusive economy is going to depend on a growing economy, right? And so if we want that to happen, we'll have to focus on our particular population in a way that leads to growth. We also need to remember and understand that interests that are invested in the status quo have been willing to make significant, patient, long-term strategic investments in their goals and values. And if we want to see the same kind of payoff that some of those interests have seen recently, we have to be willing to make those same kind of investments here in this region. They have to be long-term. They have to be significant. They have to be patient, and they can't be focused on quick wins. You're going to have to be willing to take some bold action for reward in this area. But if you can take that bold action, there's a lot great that can happen here in the city. We can bring economic inclusion to the cultural economy here in our region. When folks think about, building an economy and new driver industries and things like that, they think about hot areas of economic development, right? Like they think about technology or biomedical and things like that. What any region should do is focus on the things that you are good at in your region. Our region is great at producing culture. Our region is great at managing water, right? We've done it for hundreds of years. Those are things that we can export nationally, globally in many cases, if we have the proper investments in the people to make those things real. You heard earlier, Deidre and others talk about the 2% of business receipts in our region, right? That only 2% of receipts go to minority-owned businesses, even though 40% of the businesses are minority-owned. We've looked more deeply into that, and that's largely because we have a lot of gig workers here. But in New Orleans, it's not like Uber and Lyft that we're talking about. These are people who are caterers, event planners. They do hair and makeup for movies and performances. It's part of the cultural economy, right? These sole proprietorship businesses, they are real business activities that can be invested in with real expenses. And so those are some of the things that we can really focus on to make a difference for entrepreneurs and real people in our region that would both grow our economy and focus on our strengths.
Thanks, Lamar. Judy, what would you add to the discussion?
Well, I would add to the brilliant remarks that Lamar has already made, that based on my experience in government and in the nonprofit sector, the answer is really simple to me. Start with and stay with the community. The community is where we find our creators, our innovators, our problem solvers, and our survivors. They are the first to experience challenges and the first to identify solutions that can work if we prioritize and value them. If we invest in environments that allow community to serve as experts and thought leaders, we could move closer faster to addressing the disparity gaps and create a stronger and more equitable economy for everyone. I would add to that, it is critical to invest in organizations that are Black-led and Black-serving. This is a tremendous, tremendous opportunity to, again, practice racial equity, but also invest in where the work is being done and where it is hitting the ground directly. Organizations like the Urban League of Louisiana, but so many other organizations in this city and in this region do not and have historically not received the same level of investment. And that is where we need to make a change as well. If we can make some key changes, again, and seed the environment in a way so that we're lifting up community, we have ways to hear directly from them, to give them the platforms and the microphones that they absolutely deserve, not only for them, but for us, in order to really understand how we can move forward. It will allow us to close the disparity gaps and then create that stronger environment for everyone. You heard the mention of the money that gets left behind. Deirdre mentioned the dollars that get left on the table because of these gaps that we have just not had the courage and the will to close. If we can use this window of opportunity to close the gaps, we have another 20 years before we are a majority Black brown country and 50% white and 50% Black brown in Louisiana. This is a tremendous opportunity that we can all take to benefit all of us. Close the gaps, lift up community, let them lead us to the answers and solutions that they are experiencing, the challenges that they are experiencing. And I think that we will find the answers that we've all been looking for, the change that we want to see, and an opportunity for the economy to serve all of us in a much more equitable way.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Judy and Lamar, for your investment in and dedication to New Orleans and for sharing your insights with us today. I know we could talk about this all day, but unfortunately, our time is up. I would like to take a minute to thank the Kellogg Foundation for bringing us all together to reimagine opportunities for investing in New Orleans. And before I go, and thank you all for joining us today. Before I go, I will say to you what I've said to every potential investor from 2004 to now. It's not a matter of if New Orleans will win, but when. And when New Orleans wins, we will see a community whose culture not only inspires, but elevates and supports its culture bearers. You will see thriving children, working parents, engaged communities, and equitable systems. Can you see it? I can. To make that a reality, it will take all of us, public, private, and philanthropic sectors investing in grassroots, as well as grass tops, investing in policies, programs, and practices with the right dosage. And what I mean by dosage is time, talent, and treasure. Today, you've heard from leaders who show their love for this city through their words and their deeds. We are learning the lessons, fighting the fights, and working together to build equitable systems for the economic betterment of all New Orleanians. Join us. Like the last line of the video says, follow us, we'll lead the way. Thank you for your time, attention, and consideration. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mark Newberg to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christy. Thank you, Lamar. Thank you, Judy. It was fantastic. I'm Mark Newberg. I'm still the president of Stockbridge Advisors. I've still been working with the Kellogg Foundation and the Mission Driven Investments program for a number of years on racial equity and investment and impact. And really, we're about to get into the opportunities that we've said we were going to look at. And you don't need to hear from me for that. What you really want to do is hear from the people who led the investment. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand it over to Humera Fez to tell us about our first opportunity. Humera?
Great. Thanks, Mark. So the first opportunity we're going to talk about today is community investment management. And for context, you may have read some of the background, but to set the stage, we know, and Deirdre reminded us earlier today, that individuals and small business are deeply undercapitalized in the United States. The financing gap continues to grow, and as it does, that leads to slower growth, fewer jobs, and less ability to innovate and scale. Recent reports show that this gap is almost $100 billion here in the US. So we know that small businesses need more financing options. And we also know that the problem is even worse for entrepreneurs of color, and it is especially prevalent in areas like New Orleans and the South broadly. So enter CIM. CIM's investment strategy is to partner with innovative lending partners who use technology to create financial solutions. There's really three key innovations here that CIM is helping scale. First, the partners are fulfilling a clear market demand. They're at the forefront of finding ways to serve truly underserved populations that have been largely ignored by traditional lenders. Second, they're deeply engaged in their community. So we heard from Judy and Lamar how important this is. CIM partners with these innovative companies that know their communities and target customers deeply, including those in New Orleans and broadly in Louisiana. And finally, they're deeply impact aligned. So they are responsible, as in they're not being extractive and charging really high interest rates in the communities they lend in. And they are transparent. They provide real information on the obligations of the borrower to the loan. So the Kellogg Foundation made a $5 million investment in CIM to help scale these partnerships and ultimately provide additional debt capital to these underserved small businesses and individuals. CIM has deployed over $2 billion to small businesses, almost $500 million in the Southeast, including in New Orleans and Louisiana. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Susie, to talk more about a program-related investment as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Humera. Our second opportunity that we will be discussing is the Southern Opportunity and Resilience Fund, which was created as a structured loan facility to support CDFI's response to the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. As we know, and we've heard more about today, small businesses are the key to economic recovery, and CDFIs exist to provide critical debt capital and support services to these small businesses. But CDFIs are often undercapitalized and under-resourced, especially in the South. The SOAR was designed to enable CDFIs to provide recovery loans, which are structured to more flexibly support small businesses and nonprofits that are led by historically disenfranchised entrepreneurs, especially people of color and women. During the pandemic, businesses owned by people of color closed at more than twice the rate of white-owned businesses in the US, primarily due to lack of access to capital. And so what we found compelling about SOAR are two key elements of its innovation. First, its ability to leverage CDFI balance sheets and allow them to make 20 times the loans on every dollar. And secondly, it really centralizes the marketing and applications process through a tech platform and enables CDFIs to focus on what they do best, which is underwrite, service, and support the borrowers with technical assistance on the ground. SOAR partners with 13 CDFIs operating in 15 states in the US South, and WKKF invested into the harder to raise parts of the capital stack. We made a $3 million program-related investment into SOAR's subordinated debt, and coupled that with $1 million companion grant to LISC to function as equity and loan loss reserve. And SOAR has raised $67 million to date, and its partner CDFIs have made more than 700 loans, averaging around $50,000 in size. And in New Orleans specifically, the average loan size has been a bit smaller at around $35,000. And approximately 80% of these businesses are owned by people of color or women. Breaking that down a little more specifically, 67% owned by people of color and 41% owned by women. So we're really excited about the opportunities with SOAR and diving into your questions.
Awesome. Thank you both. So Uh, this is a Q&A, so I can promise you right now, we are not going to have time to get to all of your questions, but please put them in the chat. We're going to capture all of them, and what we don't get to, we're going to follow up with you on, whether it's individually or in group sessions. We will answer every question that's asked. And what the point that we want to make sure we drive home now is we just covered the what. Now we're going to talk about the how. And it's how we got to yes on these deals. And one of the big things that we want to keep in mind is why it was important to get to yes. Because when you're working through barriers and hurdles and internal challenges to get to yes on a particular opportunity, making sure the why is connected to the reason you're trying to do the deal is really, really important. So with that, let me ask you, Humera, first. When you were looking at CIM and you were working it through the foundation and your partners, what were the barriers or hurdles that came up internally that you had to clear?
Sure. I think the biggest barrier for us was in our assessment of risk, both financial and impact risk. So in terms of financial risk, I think we had to work against some inherent bias, both on our team as well as on our investment committee, about what it means to serve underserved markets and what risks are inherently associated with that. And so it took a while for us to really dive deeper and understand that that the lack of information, because these markets, these communities hadn't been served, does not necessarily mean that they're not credit worthy or that it's bad information. And so that was a bit of a journey for us, but it really opened the door for future investments that we made into these underserved markets, into communities of color.
I ask you a follow-up on that?
Yeah.
So now you're incorporating new data and new types of data, new ways of looking at data that you hadn't had before. What structurally had to change in order to incorporate that into your processes?
Yeah, I think structurally we had to all agree that there were the way that we were assessing risk and perceptions of risk were biased, and that we all had to come to a new understanding of the work that we were doing, the mission that we were trying to accomplish, and the impact that we needed to have. So it was sort of a joint decision-making on our team and with our investment committee, that we were serving a market that was perceived as more risky, but there were inherent economic racist ideas embedded in that we needed to overcome.
And then once you overcame them, you could move forward with the economics of the deal.
With this and many other deals as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So Susie, for you looking at the SOAR fund, which is also credit-based, but a different application of credit, almost a different tranche of credit.
Yep.
What were and using a different bucket of money, your PRI, Humera's working out of MRI. What were the internal hurdles or obstacles that you had to clear to get to yes?
Yep, thanks, Mark. So investing in SOAR really pushed us internally to assess the both and of our strategy, weighing the strengths and limitations of a centralized national infrastructure and that lever for building the ecosystem with the importance of investing in deep-rooted local partners with strong community relationships, which you've heard a lot about this morning in terms of how WKKF does that in New Orleans and in our place-based communities. And so we got to yes by acknowledging the importance of a multi-pronged approach to long-term sustainable systems change, and that there's a role for again, the both and, the centralized national model with the ability to channel capital and scale, as well as investing directly. This investment in ecosystem infrastructure is really critical to adding capacity and to resource the organizations on the ground that are closest to community. And it's needed to complement, again, the deep direct support of local partners.
One of the things when we were talking that you said that I really find fascinating about the SOAR model was that it shifted the compensation framework for the CDFIs from the really narrow spread to volume-based, and enabling the CDFIs to sell off the loans and make money off the origination and the servicing, the technical support that they're really, really, really good at. How did that change in business model resonate with the CDFIs on the ground doing the work?
So that certainly helps them do these smaller loans, reach communities and businesses that they previously really couldn't afford to reach. So it was really compelling to the CDFI partners to have this opportunity, again, to offer a product that without this capital, without this facility, simply isn't economically feasible. This product really provides, three benefits to these small businesses. It's lower rates, longer terms, and more money. Even with that, I just spoke with one of the CDFI partners yesterday who said, this was great from an impact perspective. We're able to reach these businesses. We are able to serve parts of the community that we haven't been able to afford to serve because of resource constraints. And yet it's still not, as they did their analysis, and it's still not very profitable business line, right? So when they look across their product set and they look at their overall model, it is still it's still challenging to serve the smaller businesses. So
one of the lessons is there may not be a perfect answer, but what we're trying to do as we get to yes is get to better, and then get to better again and again and again. And so this leads me to the last question. And Humera, this is something that you had brought up when we were talking about this. Looking at opportunities sometimes brings you to additional opportunities by getting involved in the first opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about how CIM created more opportunities for the Kellogg Foundation?
Yeah, so CIM is a national platform. And so part of why we made this investment was to use CIM as a way to review emerging fintech the landscape, and really saw these types of solutions that CIM was investing in as options for communities of color that had been overlooked by traditional capital providers. So CIM has been sort of helping us understand this pipeline of innovation in the sector, from supply chain lending to individual credit building to revenue-based financing. And what we had talked about, Mark, in fact, one of the ways that CIM's partnership has been especially valuable is that they introduced us to Founders First, which is a revenue-based financing fund focused specifically on entrepreneurs of color. And Susie made a program-related investment into Founders First last year.
That's awesome. So Susie, would you agree that looking at opportunities sometimes reveal more opportunities that weren't initially anticipated?
Absolutely. And in the case of SOAR, there are many more opportunities for ongoing investment in this model. So as SOAR looks to what's next, there's certainly many pathways to take to scale up this model in the South in different ways. And I know our partners at LISC are here, and they can share more as follow-up as well. And also the second piece is that the CDFIs in these regions and in these cities still need additional capital. So we talked about all the benefits of the SOAR model, and yet the need for capital all along the spectrum: equity, loan loss reserve, lending capital that is affordable for these CDFIs to do the work they're doing still exists. And so that's an unmet need that again, we invite all of you to engage with us on, and there are ways for everyone to participate. And we need all forms of capital, from philanthropic through to commercial, to build this ecosystem in the long term.
Thank you. And as I promised, we would not have time to get to every question, but I did promise that we will circle back on all the questions that we got and do individual follow-up or group follow-up with everyone. So with that, thank you, Humera. Thank you, Susie.
Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. So I know we're at time, so we want to be respectful. Thank you for today's participation in this session on New Orleans. And thank you so much to Ria, Deidre, Christy, Judy, and Lamar, and Humera, and Susie, and Mark for their detailed breakdown of the community and how we got to yes on our investments. There's so many aspects we could delve into, but hopefully this leaves you with some additional thoughts and insights on how we approach place in an effort to create more equitable economic opportunities, both at a concessionary and on concessionary terms, as well as on out of our endowment. And and to be absolutely clear, like this is the work, right? But this is also the opportunity as we think about these new regions that are not typically thought by institutional investors. And so we are always here for you if you have questions, feedback, and all of those good elements. Javon has also put the survey for this session in there in the link, so please do fill this out. We're building on each episode. And I just want to thank you again for your participation and questions and insights. Our next episode is going to be on Mississippi, the state of, and so we're very excited to delve into a more at a state level what investment opportunities look like, especially in an interesting environment with a lot of complexities like Mississippi. So thank you for that. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to the team that helps us produce each one of these episodes. And please have a great rest of your summer. We'll see you in the fall. Bye, everybody.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.